In a quiet laboratory at the University of Milan, a forensic scientist recently lowered her instruments toward a fragment of human brain tissue. The sample was over 300 years old, and the readout that appeared on her screen was something the official history book said was completely impossible. Cocaine, a drug from a plant that, according to mainstream science, did not exist in Europe at that time. The team checked the result 3 times, never changed, and what their finding has now reopened is one of the strangest cold cases in archaeological history, a mystery that points to ancient Egyptian priests, to pharaohs, and to a journey across an ocean nobody officially crossed. For decades, mainstream science has insisted that the ancient Egyptians never reached the Americas, that no human being from the Old World set foot in South America before Christopher Columbus arrived in 1492. But this latest discovery has forced researchers to confront an uncomfortable truth. Cocaine has been quietly showing up in places it should not exist. In bodies, it should not be inside. In timelines, it should never have entered. And the deeper investigators look, the harder it becomes to explain it all away. To understand why this new discovery is so explosive, we have to begin with one plant, the coca plant, Erythroxylum coca. It is the only plant on Earth that produces cocaine in any meaningful amount, and it grows in exactly one region of the world, the eastern slopes of the Andes Mountains in Peru and Bolivia, nowhere else. Not in Egypt, not in Africa, not anywhere in the Old World. For cocaine to appear inside a human body outside of South America, that body must have come into contact with the plant, or the plant must have come to the body. The team in Milan was led by Dr. Gaia Giordano. They were studying skeletons buried in the crypt of an old hospital called the Ca' Granda. Most of the bodies were forgotten patients from the 17th century. The team was performing routine analyses on preserved brain tissue. They were not looking for cocaine. They were not expecting cocaine. But in 2 of the skeletons, the chemical signature was unmistakable. Both individuals had consumed cocaine while they were alive, 200 years before cocaine was officially supposed to have arrived in Europe at all. Their research was published in the prestigious Journal of Archaeological Science, and the scientific community quietly took notice. Because if cocaine could appear in European bodies centuries earlier than the textbooks allowed, what other timelines might be wrong? This is the question that has now reopened a much older, much stranger, and much more controversial discovery. A discovery that was buried, dismissed, and laughed at for 30 years, until this 2024 finding suddenly made it impossible to ignore any longer. Because long before the Milan brains were tested, a German forensic toxicologist named Dr. Svetlana Balabanova had found something even more shocking. Inside the body of an ancient Egyptian priestess, 3,000 years old. Her name was Henut Taui, the Lady of the Two Lands. She had served in the Temple of Amun in the ancient city of Thebes around the year 1000 BCE during the powerful 21st dynasty. Her body had been carefully embalmed by Egyptian priests, preserved for over 3 millennia, and transported to a museum in Munich, Germany. When Dr. Balabanova analyzed a strand of her hair using gas chromatography combined with mass spectrometry, the same forensic technology used in modern criminal cases today, the result was the same word that has now appeared in Milan, cocaine, inside an ancient Egyptian priestess, buried thousands of miles from the only place on Earth where the plant could grow. But she was not alone. The same team tested 8 more mummies from the Munich collection, and the same result kept appearing. Cocaine, nicotine, cannabis, in 8 of the 9 bodies examined, mummies that dated from 1070 BCE all the way to 395 CE. The chemistry was clear. Something the Egyptians should not have been able to access had been inside their bodies. And when the findings were published in the peer-reviewed German journal Naturwissenschaften, the scientific establishment did not celebrate. It exploded. Egyptologists called the conclusions absurd. Toxicologists demanded retests. Critics accused the team of contamination. The story was pushed to the margins of academic conversation, almost forgotten, until the Milan discovery brought it crashing back into the spotlight this past year. And then, when researchers started revisiting the old data, they uncovered another forgotten piece of evidence, one that had been quietly buried even earlier, because something almost identical had happened to one of the greatest pharaohs in Egyptian history, the mummy of Ramesses the Great. In 1976, his body had been flown to Paris for emergency conservation work. A French botanist named Dr. Michel Lescot was given samples from the bandages and the abdominal cavity to study under an electron microscope. What she found inside the wrappings of one of the most powerful kings ancient Egypt ever produced stopped her career in its tracks. Tobacco. Plant fragments of nicotiana, a species that, according to every textbook, did not exist outside the Americas until the year 1492. Lescot was so shaken that she filmed herself extracting fresh samples from deeper inside the body, where surface contamination would be physically impossible. The The result was the same: tobacco fragments embedded in royal Egyptian flesh. Officials told her she had observed contamination from a careless workman or a pipe-smoking archaeologist. Her findings were quietly filed away, forgotten, until now. And then came the discovery that broke the contamination argument entirely. Because in 1995, two of Balabanova's colleagues, Dr. Franz Parsche and Dr. Andreas Nerlich, published a follow-up study in the Fresenius Journal of Analytical Chemistry. They had taken a single Egyptian mummy, radiocarbon dated to approximately 950 BCE, and tested not just the hair, but the deep internal organs themselves: the lungs, the liver, the stomach, the intestines, the bones, the skin. What they found shattered the standard explanation. The drugs were not on the surface. They were inside the body. Cannabis was concentrated in the lungs, exactly where you would expect if the substance had been inhaled in life. Cocaine and nicotine were concentrated in the intestines and the liver, exactly where they would settle if they had been swallowed. And then the team found something even more unsettling: cotinine. Cotinine is not absorbed from outside the body. It is a metabolite. It is created only inside a living human being when nicotine is broken down by living tissue. To find cotinine in this mummy meant the person had consumed nicotine while still alive. 3,000 years ago, in the ancient city of Thebes, the implications were enormous. The team had not found surface contamination. They had found chemical proof that a person living in ancient Egypt, 1,000 years before Christ, had ingested a substance that, according to history, would not arrive in the Old World for another 2,500 years. And the Manchester Museum in England, working independently, soon confirmed the presence of nicotine in their own Egyptian collection. The contamination theory began to fall apart. So how could plants native only to South America have ended up inside the bodies of people who lived in ancient Egypt? For decades, this was the question nobody could answer, until a Norwegian explorer named Thor Heyerdahl decided to test it himself. Heyerdahl believed the ancient Egyptians had the maritime knowledge to cross the Atlantic, so he built a boat, a replica of an ancient Egyptian papyrus reed vessel, modeled directly on tomb paintings from the Old Kingdom. He called it Ra II. On the 17th of May, 1970, he and a crew of 7 men set sail from Safi, Morocco. Their destination was the Caribbean. 57 days later, the Ra II reached Barbados. It had crossed nearly 4,000 miles of open Atlantic Ocean, using ancient Egyptian boat technology, without modern navigation, without modern materials. Heyerdahl had not just suggested the ancient Egyptians could have reached the Americas. He had proven it was physically possible. The boat itself still sits in the Kon-Tiki Museum in Oslo today. A silent witness to a voyage, mainstream archaeology still insists never actually took place. But the supporting evidence does not end with one boat. Across the world, strange parallels keep emerging. On the Canary Islands, off the coast of Africa, lived a people called the Guanche. They embalmed their dead in a manner so similar to ancient Egyptian mummification that early European explorers in the 1400s genuinely could not tell the two traditions apart. In Peru, ancient surgeons practiced trepanation, the surgical opening of the human skull, using techniques almost identical to those documented in Egyptian medical papyri. The same drill marks, the same circular cuts, the same precise methods. None of these things alone is proof of contact, but together they form a pattern that simply refuses to disappear. And here is where the story takes its sharpest turn. Because in 2023, an Italian ethnobotanist named Giorgio Samarini published a forensic-style review of Balabanova's entire body of research. His paper appeared in the journal Anthropocom. He had spent years working through her German-language papers, her data, her published books, and he raised serious concerns. He alleged missing control samples, chemical inconsistencies, possible errors in some of her published analyses. His critique became the most serious academic challenge to the cocaine mummy story since the original discovery itself. For a moment, many in the scientific world believed the case was finally closed. But then, just months later, the Milan brains delivered their verdict, and everything changed again. Because if cocaine could appear inside European bodies in the 1600s, 200 years earlier than the textbook said was possible, then the same question that had been asked of Henut Taui suddenly became impossible to ignore. The story that had been ridiculed for decades had become the story that could no longer be dismissed. The original Balabanova samples have never been fully retested by an independent laboratory using the most current methods. The internal organs of the 950 BCE mummy have never been examined again. Every few years, new fragments of evidence appear. A trace alkaloid here. A boat reconstruction that succeeds where critics said it would fail. A brain in a Milan crypt that says cocaine arrived in Europe far earlier than anyone wanted to admit. The mainstream view still insists contamination is the only explanation. But contamination cannot easily explain cocaine inside an intestine, or nicotine being metabolized by living tissue, or tobacco fragments embedded deep inside Ramesses the Great's abdominal cavity. Each finding alone might be dismissed. Together, they form a knot that science has been trying and failing to untie for over 30 years. What we know is this. A respected forensic toxicologist found cocaine in the hair of an Egyptian priestess who died around 1000 BCE. Her colleagues found the same compound deep inside the organs of another mummy from the same era. A Paris botanist found tobacco fragments embedded inside the body of Ramesses the Great. A Norwegian explorer proved that ancient Egyptian boats could physically reach the Americas in under 2 months. And now, scientists in Milan have proven that cocaine has been showing up in European bodies for far longer than the official history allows. 5 separate discoveries, 5 separate timelines, all pointing in the same direction, all officially explained away, none of them comfortably resolved. This discovery transforms a single Egyptian priestess into the heart of one of history's strangest unsolved mysteries. It is a story science still cannot fully close. A story that museums rarely place at the front of their exhibits. A story that refuses to die, no matter how many times it is dismissed. We may never know how cocaine reached the hair of a woman who lived 3,000 years before any Spanish ship crossed the Atlantic. We may never see her sister mummies tested again with modern instruments, but we know what the chemistry has revealed, and we know what the laboratories have found. And the next time someone tells you that ancient civilizations were primitive, isolated, incapable of crossing the great oceans of the world, remember Henut Taui. Remember Ramesses. Remember the papyrus boat that sailed from Morocco to Barbados in 57 days. And remember the 2 Milanese brains that just changed everything. Because the real story of what our ancestors achieved may have been hidden in plain sight all along, waiting for someone to look closely enough to finally see it. If you found this discovery as fascinating as we did, give this video a like, share it with someone who loves history's hidden mysteries, and subscribe so you never miss the next breakthrough that reshapes everything we thought we knew about the ancient world. Until next time.